Hi guys, welcome to the How to Crack the Java interview. Today we'll discuss some of the Spring Boot interview question asked by one of the interviewer in a Robert Bosch interview. Actually, I collect these questions from one of the guy who recently attended that interview, and he also cleared the first round of an interview in Robert Bosch. We'll discuss that. Actually, there are four questions from the Spring, and first one is the what is dispatcher servlet in Spring? What is the dispatcher servlet in Spring? Second one is how many containers are in the Spring? How many containers are in the Spring? Third one is the what is the difference between at the rate controller, at the rate service, and at the rate repository annotations. And fourth one is it possible to switch? Is it possible to switch at the rate service annotation with controller? Means in controller class, is it possible to write at the rate service annotation instead of at the rate controller? Okay, we'll go to the first question. We'll discuss what is the first question. First question is what is the dispatcher servlet in Spring? Actually, dispatcher servlet is the act as a front controller in Spring MVC. Dispatcher servlet is act as a front controller in Spring MVC. It is used to dispatch. It is used to dispatch the particular HTTP request to the appropriate controller class which annotated with at the rate controller, and it is also used to create the web container. We need to configure the dispatcher servlet in web.xml. It will create the web container which is manage the Spring MVC component like which is used to manage the Spring MVC component like handler mapping, view resolver, and controllers. Okay, then we'll go to the that is the dispatcher servlet. Then we'll go to the next question: how many containers are there in Spring? Actually, Spring contain two type of the container. One is the IOC container, another is the web container. Actually, IOC container created by the context loader listener. You need to configure the context loader listener in web.xml. It will create the IOC container. Then dis- dispatcher servlet you need to configure in web.xml. Then dispatcher servlet will create the web container. First, which container will load? First, IOC container will load will do the bean instantiation of all the beans, and then it will go to control will go to the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will load the all the Spring MVC related components, and it will create a web container. Actually, Spring contain two type of the containers. Then next question: what is the difference between at the rate controller annotation, at the rate service annotation, at the rate repository annotation? Actually, at the rate controller. What is the job of at the rate controller? Actually, at the rate controller annotation is annotation indicate that particular class serve the role of the controller. Particular class serve the roles of the controller. Controller annotation is a specialization of at component annotation, and it is used to mark class as a web request handler. It is used to mark a class as a web request handler. It is also a stereotype for Spring MVC presentation layer, and we cannot switch that annotation with any other like at service and other repository. But the last one, it is a stereotype annotation. Okay, at controller is completed. Then we'll go to the at service annotation. At service annotation used with the classes that provide some business functionality. Annotated with classes that provides some business functionality. Service annotation is a specialization of component annotation. It is a specialization of at the rate component annotation. It is used to mark the class as a service provider. It is used to mark a class as a service provider, but we cannot switch with any other annotation like repository. We can switch with any other annotation like repository, but it is not recommended to use. It is not recommended to always better always use the other service annotation for the service classes. Those are called as service provider. It is also a stereotype annotation. Then we will go to the repository annotation. Repository annotation are the repository annotation used to indicate that class provide the mechanism for storage, retrieval, update, delete, and search operation on the object. It is annotated is used to indicate that class provides some mechanism like update, delete, and search operation on the object. And repository annotation is also a specialization of Ardorate component annotation. It is used to mark the interface as a DAO provider. It is a stereotype for DAO layer. And the repository annotation can switch can possible in repository annotation, but it is not recommended to use. Switch means instead of repository annotation, you can use service annotation, but it's not recommended to use. It is also called a stereotype annotation. It is also a stereotype annotation. These are the difference. See, at the rate controller annotation and at the rate service annotation, at the rate repository annotation. Okay, then at the rate controller annotation indicate that particular class serve as a role of the controller, serve as a role of the controller, role of a controller. This class mark a- mark the class as a web request handler. Service annotation use the class as a class that provides some business functionality. Then mark the class as a service provider, and the repository annotation is used to indicate that class provides some mechanism like storage, retrieval, update, delete, search operation on the object. Okay, all are stereotype annotation, but all are the specialization for the. It is also used to specialization of a component annotation. Okay, okay, we'll go to the next question. Is it possible to switch service annotation with controller? Means in controller class, just example, I have a controller class. Is it possible to write just example class address controller, some controller address controller, some controller is there. My controller class ABC controller. In the ABC controller is it possible to write that annotation at the rate service? Is it possible or not? Is it possible or not? Possible or not? No, it is not possible. Why? If you write the service annotation instead of a service on the controller class, what will happen? Actually, in Spring MVC architecture, we have a class like dispatch or servlet which act as a front controller. Which act as a front controller. It is declared in web.xml that represent as a front controller which dispatch all the HTTP requests toward the appropriate controller, which dispatch all the HTTP requests toward the appropriate controller classes which annotated are the red controller. These classes are typically annotated with at request mapping annotation that specify with HTTP request is handled by the controller. Means dispatch The dispatcher scan the classes annotated with controller and detect request mapping annotation with them. If you write service annotation on your controller class, then dispatcher servlet will not understand the service annotation to dispatch the HTTP request to particular controller. Then we cannot. It is not possible to write service annotation instead of controller annotation on the controller class. Okay, these are the question answer we discussed. Then we will discuss some more question in next video. Thank you.